What's up, everybody, and welcome back to the DK Garage. I'm Jeremy.
And I'm Joe.
Well, Joe, I think we're going to do a little bit different this week. A lot of things that we kind of want to dive into, but we're not going to do a normal race sort of projection because this is the All-Star race, and it's very different than most.
It's laid out differently. They've got a bunch of stages. They have the open race. There's a lot that plays into the mix. A lot of unknowns. Don't feel comfortable going into a lot of detail, but we might talk about it a little bit as we get further along. But as you said, it's pretty much mid-season, and there's a lot we can kind of go over. There's a lot of data and information available to us that really helps us dissect what's happened, and we can maybe talk about what could potentially happen.
Absolutely. I think one of the first places we should start is, well, let's talk a little bit about Sonoma. We don't need to spend a bunch of time on it. It told me some stuff, but I think mostly what it told everyone is Kyle Larson is really good this year.
Really good.
Really freaking good. How did your lineups fare, first of all?
It was a great day. I had exposure to Larson because I wanted to have, if he dominated, I wanted to have exposure to that, and he did pretty much that. It was a nice payday in those lineups. I had Truex and throughout a lot of those, and he had great place differential, which we thought would be the case. A lot of Ross Chastain. So I ended up doubling up my bankroll that I had out there this week, and this past week, and it's always nice to be able to do that. How about yourself?
Yeah, I did about the same. I think I doubled, or maybe a little over doubled my entry fees, which was nice. Kind of build that bankroll back up. Probably going to play a little soft this week. Like I said, we may get into that some, but yeah, at the beginning I was a little worried, man. It was not looking great. Especially with the hand builds, I end up going really heavy Chastain, a little bit Kurt Busch, but not too much. But I end up going with a decent amount of Logano, which I didn't think I would end up on, but I kind of felt the same way. I'm like, man, the way Larson is running, I'm just going to roll the dice on a little bit more. And I had quite a few Larson Logano builds just because of the price and letting you get guys like Chastain and a few of those other guys. I got lucky, didn't go too heavy on Newman. He was a little bit of a disappointment. But all in all, man, it was a great day. I thought it was a great race, and the ending was good. You know, the battle between Hendrick teammates, that was fun. Chase Elliott looked pretty good, but he just never looked quite like Larson.
Yeah, you expected Truex and Elliott to be in contention, as they're always talked about in road course settings, and now I think you really have to put Larson in that conversation. He's been fairly consistently getting better here in the road course settings, and now he's got a win at Sonoma. We thought that would probably be where he got his first road course win, so he now has a little bit extra boost of confidence as if he needed it. So it's going to be interesting to kind of see how things progress moving forward. Looking back at Sonoma, it's always great to go back and do a full slate review. We try to make it easy for you to go view everything we're dissecting right now in our results slate review that's available on our Patreon. We have a post there on our Twitter every week to kind of remind you. It's always beneficial to see how optimal some of these drivers were able to perform. You mentioned Joey Logano. He was in the optimal lineup. We have that in that slate review. We have the full breakdown of the optimal. Kyle Larson was there. Kurt Busch, Ross Chastain, Eric Jones, and Daniel Suarez wrapped that up. It's pretty crazy to see Daniel Suarez and Eric Jones, both of those guys, making the optimal. We talked about Daniel Suarez as had an opportunity to finish strong. The price tag wasn't that extreme. Eric Jones surprisingly had a great run there. He's a true road course kind of guy. You kind of think he might step up to the plate. It was kind of cool to see him have a strong day.
Yeah, unfortunately, I didn't end up with too much Jones, but I did have him a little bit, and I had him with the right guys, so that helped out. I had, like I said, a lot of Chastain, and I actually did have a decent amount of exposure to Suarez in kind of the right lineups. Like I said, it wasn't a takedown type of tournament day, but it was one you just kind of say, hey, awesome, now I got a little bit more money for next time. You know, just, again, like we've said, build that bankroll. But one of the things that I think the biggest takeaway from me with this past race is Watkins Glen is going to be fun because Truex is really good there. He's finished second, I believe, both races to Chase Elliott's wins. And Larson, he just won at the most technical of the main sort of road courses in the NASCAR circuit at Sonoma. And with the speed that he's shown each and every week, Watkins Glen is a much faster race track than Sonoma. Man, those three, it might be hard to build lineups that week, and you're going to have to diversify between those three, but I think just watching the race is going to be fantastic. So I know we're getting a little ahead of ourselves in the schedule, but that was a key takeaway is all those three guys, 1, 2, 3. Yeah, that's going to be fun.
Yeah, it's one of those things. We've got an opportunity to kind of look overall at the season data, and there's a lot of data, like we said, available to us at this point in the season. And there are definitely drivers that stick out, whatever you're looking at, different packages. We've got the 550 horsepower and the 750 horsepower package that they're running at different style tracks this year. And you start diving into that data. Is there anything right out the gate that jumps out? I know we've talked about Kyle Larson a lot. Martin Truex has got the 3 wins. He's had that nice stretch of a nice stretch of races there for a while. But then here lately, the last, I believe, 4 races have been won by Team Hendrick. So looking at all this, is there something that you want to jump in and start talking about as we get into this portion of the show where we're talking about kind of what we've seen so far this year?
Well, I think one of the things that we need to look at is the season overall. It has started out really strong, Denny Hamlin, and has definitely drifted more Kyle Larson. The 16 races that we've run, Denny Hamlin is barely holding on to that lead as far as driver rating goes, 109.8 to 108.9. So less than a point there separates their driver rating. And the biggest difference between the two is, they both have 9 top 5s, which is really impressive. But Larson has 3 wins. Hamlin has 0. In the last few races, Hamlin has still been solid. He still had some decent runs. It's not like he's fallen off a cliff, but he does not look anywhere near the way he did at the beginning of the year. Is this something you think that they may be able to correct throughout the remainder of the season, or is this the trend that we're going to see the rest of the year with that team?
It could be the trend we see. It's been very consistent for the most part. Yeah, he's had a little bit of struggles as of late, but it's not been anything that they can't overcome. It's not put them in a bind by any stretch of the imagination. I think they'll continue to fine-tune this as they get throughout the season. There's a stretch of tracks that he might be able to do well as we get into some 750 horsepower environments. So it's going to be interesting to see how they adapt and what happens, but I think they'll be right in the mix whenever it matters in the playoffs. I don't think we should be worried that they haven't won yet. I think they will get there eventually. You look at his teammate, Denny Hamlin's teammate, Martin Truex Jr., basically you were talking about those two. He's right there in that conversation. His driver rating isn't as high as the two you just got talking about, but he does have those 3 wins. So that's something that is something that I'm not too concerned that it points to. Hamlin should at some point potentially kind of be able to get it all dialed in and start seeing some wins potentially.
You mentioned Truex. One thing that I found a little interesting, when we divide up what we've done so far this year in 2021, the 550 horsepower package, his driver rating is 87. That would be 10th best amongst the drivers. You flip over to 750, he's the second best driver at 114.5.
Yeah, and the only one that's better than him is Denny Hamlin in that package. He's got a 114.9.
Barely better.
And that's why I think Denny Hamlin and that team, when we get to some of these tracks, 750 settings, that they'll start to click. They'll get this thing rolling, and we could potentially see him get a little stretch like Martin Truex had. Martin Truex had a nice stretch of races where he won 3 times. We could see multiple wins with Denny Hamlin. Hopefully we can see that coming a little bit and dial it in for DraftKings. And reap some of those benefits.
One thing that would be a little concerning if I'm looking at the Truex getting into the playoffs, there's a lot of tracks that he has good data at. But if he is not able to capitalize on those 750 package tracks, like that Martinsville, that last race to get in, if he doesn't have the good first 2 races at those ovals in that round, if he in fact makes it to that round, if we see the same sort of domination out of Elliott, his teammate Hamlin, you got to throw Kyle Busch in there, and of course Larson. If they end up being that guy that day, I think Martin Truex has the potential to be a little bit of a sitting duck, and I would not have said that a few weeks ago. But these package differences is about as big as I think any one of the drivers that we may talk about.
Well, you're right, but I think the guy that we would probably talking around about next would be Joey Logano. If we're looking at the overall season stats, he kind of comes in fourth. His comparison from 550 data to 750 data is almost as extreme. So there's going to be some interesting situations as we get further into the playoffs, and kind of we still have some races to determine and fill in this data, but I see where you're coming from. There's some discrepancies here, and I'm looking here to compare Joey Logano, what we just talked about, the 550. Joey Logano has the 11th place driver rating right now at a little under 83. So he's even worse than Martin Truex in the 550 scenario, but he is right behind him in the 750 package as the 3rd best driver rating. He does have that 1 win, but man, it's interesting to see.
Which was at the dirt track.
Exactly, it was on the dirt track. So it's kind of a wild card race. We all knew that, but we haven't seen as much consistency as from Team Penske as in a whole compared to what we have with Gibbs and what we have with Hendrick. So he looks to be, based on the data and everything that we're looking at, in a good spot progressing through the season, but it's kind of concerning when we're not seeing all of his teammates kind of hitting the marks as well. Very, very interesting. What are your takes on some of that?
So out of the tracks that we run that will be in the playoffs so far this year, Darlington, things like that, Penske is grouped really tightly as far as driver rating goes on those tracks. Brad comes in at the best, barely over Blaney. He's 4th best overall, 101.7. Then Blaney, 101.6. And then Logano, a little bit of a drop-off at 98.8. But the thing that's a little bit worrisome to me looking at that is, they performed really good at those early on, but they're ahead of guys like Kyle Busch and Kyle Larson, and they both have wins at one of those playoff tracks so far. It could get a little bit dicey for Penske. I don't see them necessarily getting 2 drivers in this championship 4. Looking at it, where they did last year, I think they could be in a little bit of trouble, but I think out of those drivers, if 2 of them at least make the round of 8, I could see Logano being the best, potentially getting that win at Martinsville, or at least enough points to get in at Martinsville because of how good he's been on 750s this year. What do you think? You see something similar? You see it a little different?
No, I think that's very, based on what I view and what I've seen throughout the season, I truly feel that's probably the most likely scenario. But it's going to be interesting to see. We've still got a lot of racing to do. There's a lot of drivers that we haven't talked about based on the season data. After Joey Logano, it's William Byron and Chase Elliott on the season data. And we've talked about Kyle Larson and how Team Hendrick seems to have here recently dialed things in really, really, really well. Looking at that, William Byron's ahead of Chase Elliott in driver rating, and they both sit there with 1 win. Everybody at Team Hendrick has at least 1 win. The gentleman with 2, Alex Bowman's a little bit further down the list on driver rating and everything along those lines. He's been a little bit more inconsistent. Does it surprise you where we're at?
He has 2 wins.
Absolutely. Is it surprise you where we're at with William Byron being ahead of Chase Elliott at this point in the season?
Well, what's interesting is he's above Chase Elliott after finishing terribly at Sonoma. Now, he was running good while he was running, but he had some damage and did, DNF'd the race.
First one of the year.
Yeah. And he's still ahead of Chase Elliott. But Chase Elliott did not get off to a great start this year. He had some decent runs. Obviously, he got second at Daytona and was looking good at the Daytona road course. And then we've referenced what happened to that many times. So he looked good early, but he didn't perform that well consistently early on. Whereas William Byron, he came out and he won Homestead, the third race of the year, dominated it. So really, Chase Elliott has closed the gap with Byron, which is to be expected. But they are still pretty far behind where Larson's at, and obviously that's anyone who's watched these races cannot argue that at all. But even though the driver rating does suggest Alex Bowman is way down there, I don't see him in the last few races as being that far off of William Byron and Chase Elliott. Hendrick's got a strong group this year, and I think we talked about this in one of our early episodes, and we really didn't know the answer, and I think we're starting to finally see the answer. And that question was, which teams are going to go for it this year in the last year of this car, and which ones are going to be maybe holding back a little bit of money, trying to set up more for the next gen car. And if that's true, it looks like Hendrick is all in this year. Gibbs is a pretty close second, but off a little bit, but I would imagine they'll stay in that game. And Penske seems to be pretty good, but Stewart-Haas would be the team that seems to be at this point. I don't know why they'd put much effort in anyone besides Harvick at this point in the year.
Yeah, when you look down further at the list, you've got that group together. It's really Cole Custer, Eric Almirola there at the bottom too with Chase Briscoe, and it's been a big disappointment for Stewart-Haas as a whole to have three guys outside the top 20 in driver points. And really Kevin Harvick, he's been fairly consistent, just hasn't had the speed, but just his driver performance has been enough to get a little bit extra out of that car at this point. It's sad to see that they haven't really progressed too much, and those guys there at the bottom seem to almost be struggling a little bit more in the Eric Almirola situation. But it's interesting to see where they're at.
Well, I believe in the regular NASCAR point system, I believe it's 26th, 27th, and 28th is all Cole Custer, Briscoe, Almirola. And then when we look at it and sort it by driver rating, Cole Custer's 25, Briscoe's 27, Almirola's 28. And we're looking at a 61.7 driver rating for Cole Custer, and then Eric Almirola would be the worst at 56.3. It's a tight grouping, but that is way down the list from where we kind of thought even those guys might be this year. I mean, do you kind of feel the same way that they're just no longer putting in that top tier effort this year? Let's just regroup for next year. Or do you think they really are struggling this much?
It could be a combination of the both. I don't know enough to say, hey, yeah, I can pinpoint something, but it is kind of concerning that they really haven't figured this out at this point in the season. So those three guys might not get as much out of it this season and really have to start next year from scratch. Everybody is going to be on the same page next year. Everybody's going to be at the same level based on where we're at, the next gen car. So it'll be interesting. It's difficult to see. Like I mentioned earlier, Kevin Harvick's been consistent. Out of the 16 races we've ran so far, he has 11 top 10s. So he's been able to get something out of that. He could be in the conversation in the playoffs. We can't count him out, but based on what I'm seeing so far, it's not probably going to be a long playoff run for him and that team.
I would definitely agree with that statement, but just to be fair, so I pulled some fairly large data samples just for fun. You'll be able to see this in the Garage Thoughts post on our Patreon. But if we look from 2018 to so far this year at all the tracks that will be in the playoffs, on the schedule for this year. Not so Homestead wouldn't be included because that's no longer in the playoffs. So we have up to 61 races of data. Guess who is number one in driver rating in those 61 races?
Oh, I would bet it's Kevin Harvick.
It is Kevin Harvick. He just barely above Logano, which is also very interesting. So that's why we don't want to count Logano out in those playoffs. But a driver rating of 105 across 61 races. Very impressive to me. So if they are able to summon up a little bit more for the playoffs, because it looks like he should get in, unless we get a bunch of crazy first winners that push him out, he should make the playoffs. If they get that team does get clicking, you can't count out Harvick.
No, you can't.
By any means.
Absolutely, he's one of the greatest in the sport at this point. He's probably the most prevalent NASCAR driver right now that has the most experience. And man, you put him and Kurt Busch in that conversation too. But it's going to be interesting if they can find a little bit more speed and just dial it in, because he should be in the conversation. It's what we're used to. We thought it would be the case, talking about some of the stuff as we got approaching the season in early episodes. We thought he would be in the conversation. Just haven't seen the speed, but we've still got – it's a long season. We still have a lot of races left to run. See if they can fine-tune it.
You know, I'm looking at this list that we're just talking about with Harvick, and, you know, I mentioned Logano was second. Kyle Busch, not really much of a surprise. He's third. Truex ranks out fourth, and Brad is fifth. But you got to go down to eighth to find Denny Hamlin. I know we kind of already touched on him, and he's in a fairly tight grouping, not that far off. But just something to think about. If you don't see him perform as well in this playoffs, I'm sure, well, I was going to say he probably will win the regular season, but the way things are going, I think he had almost 100-point lead like 3 races ago, and it's down to like 40-something now. Definitely keep your eye on that 11 team. It could be really good the next few races, but it could start going south big time.
It's going to be interesting to watch. I think there's a lot to unfold, but somebody I think we can't overlook is Kyle Busch. He's been able to kind of string together a handful of races that have been fairly consistent, and he seems to be gathering more confidence as a whole. We talked about it, his teammates Denny Hamlin and Truex performing well. Kyle Busch does have a win already this year. He's got 10 top 10s in the 16 races as well. There is a difference between his 550 and 750 stats, though, that based on playoffs, we'll see kind of how everything shakes out. What are your thoughts on Kyle Busch so far, and what are you thinking heading into this stretch and the playoffs with Kyle Busch?
One of the other data sheets in the garage thoughts you'll be able to check out is from 2018 to 2021 so far this year, all the tracks for the remaining season so far.
So the remaining stretch of the season before the playoffs?
Before the playoffs. Okay. So the regular season. Kyle Busch ranks out as the third best driver in driver rating at 102.3, and that's a sample size of 28 races. Very strong. 11.5 average finish, so that's a little concerning. But he does have 2 wins, 14 top 5s, 19 top 10s. Would be very surprised to see Kyle Busch not finish the regular season strong. And he seems to be the best car behind Hendrick so far these last 3-4 races. He's been the guy that's kind of been up there trying to break up that freight train that is Hendrick. I like what we're seeing out of the 18 team. They've been capitalizing on races where they've had practice. That may really benefit them at next week when we go to Nashville, a track we do not know anything about. No one does, but they'll have practice. So I like Kyle Busch the rest of the year. I'm sure he'll start getting priced up quite a bit in DraftKings. So we may not be able to lock him in each and every week. But if Larson obviously keeps doing what he's doing, I think that does open the door for some nice pivots to Kyle Busch.
It's going to be interesting because whenever you look at how strong Kyle Larson's been in the 550 horsepower setup, Kyle Busch is right there with them. Both the Kyles have been really good in that package. Kyle Busch is second, like we said, right behind him with a 104.3 driver rating. And his average running position's in the top 8, which is actually better than Kyle Larson over this season. But we haven't seen the pure dominance from Kyle Busch like we have with Kyle Larson in that Hendrick team. But still, very, very strong. He's been consistent, more consistent this season than last. He was my pick for the champion, to be the champion headed into the season. I like where he's at. I think they're progressing, and he could potentially be that dark horse that can sneak in and take it away from Kyle Larson, in my opinion.
He has not got those 10 wins that you projected him to have so far at this point in the season. No, but I think you did have like 2 or 3 so far. And you know what? He might have had that if Larson didn't come out and just put this whooping on everybody. And the reason why I kind of bring Larson back into this, in that same scenario you just said, the 550, this is just mind-blowing. Average laps led 119.6 out of 7 races.
Yeah, that's over 7 races. The dude's averaging almost 120 laps led a race.
And then you look at Kyle Busch, who is, driver rating-wise, the second best. His average is 3.9. I mean, absolutely insane. But they both have the same top 5 amounts, at 4. So strong there. And Kyle Busch has a better average finish at 7.7 versus at 11. Like I said, I like what we're seeing. Another guy that has been pretty solid. His average finish is 8.1 on this 550 package. Not a guy that I expected to have to talk about too much this year. Austin Dillon in that 3 team. I kind of bring him up because he won the spring race or whatever the summer race at Texas last year. Could be a nice solid pick in the race for the All-Star race. He likes that track. He's performed well there. It's a different package. They're tapering the engine down a little bit from 550 to 510, but he's the 7th best driver so far out of those 7 races on 550 horsepower package. Like I mentioned, 8.1 average finish. Pretty solid. What do you think? How have you been? What's your analysis on Austin Dillon so far this year?
I've liked what I've seen. I've seen him. It seems like he's grown up maybe a little bit more, understands himself and how to finish races. He's not being as aggressive. He's getting the finishes that they need. He's in the playoff conversation. He's very, very. It's still very difficult to want to feel confident, but I'm feeling more comfortable every week based on the data and based on what I'm seeing and just the overall consistency. And then the 550 horsepower package, very, very consistent. Out of the 7 races, he has 5 top 10s. That's very strong. And
very strong.
Going into this All-Star weekend, I really do like him a lot from a DraftKings angle. I'm not going to be playing a ton this weekend, but it's going to be interesting to see where I land on him because he has that win at Texas. He is somebody that these kind of wild card races, he kind of finds a way to be in the mix at the end. So I'm definitely going to take a look at that.
There is a pretty big drop off when you compare the 750 to the 550. So that could be a little troublesome for both him and his teammate Tyler Reddick. Reddick is the 15th ranked, and Dillon would be the 16th ranked driver and driver rating on that 750 package. Pretty steep drop off, little concerning playoff time, but the fact that there are still several 550 tracks. You also got Talladega in there, and we know he can do it super speedways. I'm not saying Austin Dillon's a championship 4 threat by any means, but I don't believe he's ever been in the top 8 since they've gone to this format. If he has, let me know. But he is, I think, a legit top 8 contender this year just because he's, I think, a little bit more strategic in how he chooses to be aggressive. The only time I really used to see him on TV was spinning out, wrecking, flat tires. You don't see him too much on TV, and then you go look at the box score, and he's, 6th, or he's 7th or 8th. You're like, wow, like that's pretty good. Like that's a big improvement what we've seen over like 2 years ago, Austin Dillon.
It definitely is, and that's why I think I'm feeling a little bit more comfortable having more exposure to him in the right environments.
Right.
But it's definitely something week to week you have to analyze and see exactly where he's priced, just like everybody else. And it is nice though to see that more consistent Austin Dillon, especially in the 550s.
Well, you can feel more comfortable when he's in that right spot where you're like, based on the salary, based on his track history, or maybe even recent performance, it's like, okay, before it was like, this is a wild card. It's like playing Ricky Stenhouse. It's like, if he hits, awesome, but you don't feel confident playing it. I definitely feel much more confident playing Austin Dillon when it's in the right spots, when there's some PD on the table, and where it's a track that he's had good history at. Anyone else really stand out to you so far this year that maybe hasn't gotten overlooked or has gotten overlooked or that needs to be talked about?
I really think Michael McDowell is somebody I'd like to talk about because you talked about earlier in the podcast teams that are going all in for next year, teams that are setting themselves up for the future as well. And I think this team has done a great job of putting themselves in a situation this year where if the season ends today, Michael McDowell is in the playoffs and people continuing to get wins will allow him to make the playoff contention. And in 550 horsepower setups, he's been a little bit better, a little bit more consistent. Some of these other drivers, but it's just cool to see how they were able to come out with a win at Daytona and then finish strong on some of these road courses, which we knew they would do. But Michael McDowell next year with these big teams that have all this overhead, this new next-gen car is supposed to help trim some of that, and this team runs really lean as it is. So they're going to be accustomed to kind of what's going to be happening. Michael McDowell's a great driver. He has that ability to communicate with his team on what they need to do to develop this further. So I think going into next year, he's helped himself be in a strong position. And with that one win, he's already locked into the playoffs. And it's somebody that I don't think gets talked about enough as a driver that is in contention in some of these races.
He's definitely gets overlooked by more of the bigger media, and it's kind of a shame because he's seems like a good dude. He always is giving his best effort. Now, of course, we saw I think this week on Twitter him and Suarez get into it at Sonoma. Not sure what all that's about. But he's giving it everything for his team. He has potential. There's some tracks that he can be good at, but I'm looking at kind of that first round, Darlington, Richmond, Bristol. He's been a little bit better on the 550s, just statistically wise. Obviously, got the win at Daytona. That's also going to help those driver rating numbers. That first round could be tough for him. And he's not been the strongest just overall this year out of the current locked-in playoff drivers. But if he is able to get to that next round, he's got to win at Super Speedway, so you got Talladega. You have Vegas, which he could have a decent day. He could potentially win Dega or have a really strong finish. And then another road course, the Charlotte Roval. Not been his best track overall, but if they're able to get past that first round, which I think is a big if at this point, you're right. They're a team that really would at that point deserve to be talked about more, especially heading into next year. Like that's impressive out of that small team compared to these big monsters.
Yeah, it's just something that I feel is deserving of attention at this point in the season, being able to put themselves in a position to be talked about for the playoffs. Mid-season, they were able to chalk up that win week 1 for a small team. That's absolutely huge, and they continue to slowly develop, and we'll see how the rest of the season plays out. But man, there's a lot to like from what we've seen so far.
So out of the 4 drivers that are currently right below the playoff cut line, that would be Matty D, Kurt Busch, Ross Chastain, Ricky Stenhouse. Who do you think has maybe the best chance to get in and kick one of these other guys out?
Well, it's going to be interesting with Matty D getting a new crew chief. He was replaced midseason, and we don't see that all the time, but I think it was something that we've both heard him talk about, that team not really having what it needs at most of the tracks. They did have a nice stretch of races a couple times this season, and just hasn't been consistent. And being that they're Penske related, we've seen some of those guys have some consistency, and we just haven't seen it with the 21 team. But with this new crew chief change, I think it might be the spark. It might be what's needed to kind of get them to that next level to be in the playoffs. But Kurt Busch has been somebody that if he's not wrecking or having a mechanical issue, he's been having strong finishes. So Chastain, we've talked about here recently, he's gotten a lot better and continuing to finish strong. There's a lot to like, but I would think Matty D probably is in the best situation at this point if everything clicks with the crew chief. If it goes to south, there's no point of even having that conversation, but we don't know yet.
Yeah, if he's able to get in, if we look at the races so far this year, the 7 races at the playoff track so far, he would have the 12th best driver rating overall, just out of the drivers who are already in there. So he could do some damage. I mean, his average finish is 11.3 at those 7 tracks, whereas a guy like Kurt Busch, although he has run well at times during those tracks, he's had issues. His average finish is 21.9. Not very good for Kurt Busch on those playoff tracks. But like you said, you got to give him respect. Like, it seems to me like when he's had these issues, he was running towards the front. If they can get that cleaned up, if he can get a little bit more luck on his side, I guess, he's a guy that I think could really do it. But they got to get in. Chastain has been really coming on. I know he's down there a little bit. I don't know if he would need a win to get in. It would certainly help, and I don't know if I see that on the schedule for the remainder of the year. And Stenhouse, if he's able to pull it out at Daytona, maybe he gets in. I don't necessarily see him doing it. So for me, unless there's a sneaky win like a Bubba Wallace at Daytona or something like that, which is certainly possible. You know, we saw Cole Custer get in last year to win at Kentucky, and that kind of changed a lot of things for a lot of guys. I got to be in agreement. I think Matty D and Kurt Busch are those next strongest guys, and they're guys that could and should get past that first round. It's going to be really fun to watch this play out.
Yeah, NASCAR is advertised as the best season ever, and we've seen a lot of new winners, a lot of different winners, I should say, throughout the season so far. There's a lot of racing left, so we're going to probably get some more. It's going to jumble up this playoff conversation even more so, but it's something we'll continue to talk about, I think, throughout the season because we have to. It's going to be fun.
Well, let's take a small break because I think we'll probably circle back to some drivers, but I think now would be a good time to kind of set the stage for the playoffs. You know, this isn't quite a mid-season break, but it's kind of what this podcast is. We're kind of recapping where we've been and where we think we might go. So after we get through the All-Star race, which is going to be, I think, a lot of fun and interesting to watch all these crazy gimmicky inverts and stuff like that. It should be entertaining. We go to, I mentioned earlier, Nashville. Never been there before. That's going to be interesting, but at least we'll have some some practice data. We'll see qualifying. Hopefully, there's no rain that would cancel that. That would really suck. So at least we can kind of fine tune what our lineups might look like for that race. But then we get a doubleheader at Pocono. That's going to be challenging for all the DFS content providers getting material out, us included. But we'll strategize and try to give you guys the best stuff we can. I'm already saying when Kyle Larson wins the first race, go ahead and lock him in for the second race because that's probably what you're going to need to be optimal.
But yeah, they'll probably have the invert going on, which will then put him in a position to get place differential, and then he'll lead lap. So,
right.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of interesting situations as we get further on with the schedule. because Nashville, like you said, there's not any information on. Then we have back-to-back at Pocono, and then where are we at? We're at America, right?
Yes, that is correct. Another road course. Looking forward to it, but we also get practice at that one and qualifying, so at least we can see it. But you got to think that's probably going to be more than likely a Larson, Elliott, Truex kind of a race. Going to be fun to watch. It's a great track. And then we head back south down to Atlanta, where Larson already dominated, but that was a race Ryan Blaney ended up catching him at the end and winning. So that's going to be fun. Then we're at let's see, is it Dover? No, this is Loudon. Yeah, New Hampshire.
Yep.
Yeah. So I think that's memory serves. That's kind of a shorter track, correct?
Yeah, and it's going to be a 300 mile event, I believe. So it's going to be interesting to see that. But again, there's another road course at Watkins Glen.
Well, we'll quickly point out that will be the last race before the Olympic break. So the teams will get like 2 weeks off, I believe, 2 or 3 weeks off to prepare for Watkins Glen, which should make it really fun to watch. Again, Larson, Elliott, Truex most likely be battling for the lead most of the race. And then after that, we go right back to a road course at Indianapolis and run the Indy road course. The Xfinity race was great there last year. Of course, it did have some rain. But I believe there was 4 or maybe even 5 drivers that last lap exchange first place. I mean, they were all right there. It was a fun race to watch. So that should be really interesting to see which teams, if anyone, can potentially upset those top 3 that I've already mentioned. And then we go to Michigan, which we know Harvick, Larson, those guys have been really good there the past few years. That will be fun. And then, of course, we end the season in Daytona for the Coke Zero 400. And that's the wild card race. That's the cutoff race. You think you're good on points, and then a Michael McDowell type guy wins and gets in. You know, we may, like I said, we may see a Ricky Sithouse lock his way in, or someone who's not currently in. Could see a Eric Almirola who, oh my gosh, could you imagine if Almirola is able to get in because he wins Daytona? And he's a really good super speedway driver, so if he can keep it clean that day, that's going to be hit out of those tracks. I mean, if we're just going to talk about Almirola again real quick, to me, that would be the best opportunity for him, and that's never a good feeling.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I like how NASCAR has made the schedule as that's the wild card race, that's the season finale for the regular season, and then we start right back up all the cars that unfortunately weren't able to make the playoffs. They still have to race and finish out the season, but yeah, there could be someone like Bubba Wallace, who we have not talked about at all, in a super speedway environment, come out on top, and then he's in the playoff mix. There are so many things left to play out. You talked about going down that stretch of how many road courses are left. There's so many things to play out there as well. Man, I am so excited to see how some of this is going to shape up, because this is why we do this. There's so many unknowns. There's so much data that we're able to take a look at week in and week out to prepare. The same thing happens there. Man, I'm looking at somebody like Bubba Wallace or somebody out from right field potentially sneaking in on that last race. And like I said when we started talking about it, I love how they've formatted the schedule to really feel like a wild card can make the playoffs that last week, and it's going to be extremely fun to watch.
All right, so that's 10 races left in the regular season before the playoffs start. Out of these 10, which, let's say 2, are you really excited about? Which ones would jump off to you as just being like, you got them circled because it's just going to be fun? Maybe not necessarily from the DraftKings side, but just from watching the sport.
Watkins Glen is number 1. I like that one circled every single time. I think I talked about it before in some of the previous podcasts. It was something I enjoyed doing on the N64, playing NASCAR back in the day. Loved the road courses. There weren't very many. There's only 2 on the schedule for forever, and that was the one I enjoyed the most. So that was something that I'm always looking forward to every year. And just talked about Daytona. Everybody loves Daytona. I just love that setting. The Coke 400 was always something that just kind of look back at as a kid and just have an experience that like it's no other. It's just under Daytona under the lights. It's a lot of fun, a lot of fun experiences that you can kind of relive every single time that you come see it on the schedule.
Yeah, it used to be the 4th of July race, which they always went, they always went way into it. It was
cool paint schemes.
Yeah, it was just fun. It was like another kind of like a Coke 600 type thing. It was cool. But now it gets to be the drama race, which it was already a drama race, but then you compound it with if you're outside the playoffs and you can win and lock yourself in, like there's so much pressure. And then the guys that are above the cut line in points, but just barely, they don't want to wreck out because then they'll more than likely not advance. So there's so much pressure on everyone in the field. And if you're one of those drivers who happens to be up front competing for the regular season championship, if you win that, you get 15 playoff points. That can potentially buy you a subpar race. It might even be enough to get you through an early round if you struggled, Obviously, there's no way he could get in there, but if McDowell was closer to getting that, and if he could lock that in with a second win or something like that, that would buy him potentially that first round in the playoffs. So playoff points are huge, and we're going to see a lot of guys really competing up towards the front, anywhere in the playoffs, trying to get these stage wins, trying to obviously get another win, pad their stats, obviously keep guys like Larson and Truex from getting more, because we've seen it basically every year. 1 point can be the difference between advancing from one round to the next. And I don't have any specifics, but I've seen it many times where that driver who got eliminated ended up running really well the next 3 races and more than likely would have advanced another round had they just had that extra point. And so teams are going to be cranking it up following this all-star race. I'm really excited. I'm right there with you. Watkins Glen is still my favorite track to race around if I'm playing a NASCAR or really any sort of car game. It's just such a fun track. It's so fast. It's not that technical, but it's enough where you got to kind of pay attention. And then Daytona would be up there. But I'm looking forward to also a couple of the new road courses. The Road America, I don't know much about it at this point. There's still some time before I'll really dive into it, but it's a very, I'd say, historic road course. So I think that's going to be really fun to see those guys on that track. And then, obviously, anytime you go to the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, it's a big deal. There's no more Brickyard 400. That wasn't the best race for these stock cars. I think the road course is going to produce a much more entertaining race, and I think there will be more drivers feeling like they have a shot to win that than going into the Brickyard. Guys like potentially Chase Briscoe, who I think he won that Xfinity race there last year. If he didn't, he was running really well. Maybe they can put together that race for him. I mean, he can get around that track. So I think there's going to be a lot of guys having those 2 races circled as the next sort of wild card races behind Daytona.
We've got a lot of racing to play out left to play out before the playoff stretch, and we talked a lot about the playoff courses or tracks already. That's going to be something that we're going to continue to talk about as we get closer to this playoff time frame. Weekly, we're going to have drivers that are going to be putting themselves in positions to try to make that cut, and we're going to have to take that in consideration whenever we're talking about, hey, are we going to have exposure? He's in this situation. Like, this is stuff that we really have to understand as we move forward.
One thing I kind of wanted to touch on earlier, and we just kind of went off on our usual tangents or whatnot. Playoff performance. So I mentioned earlier the up to 61 races of data that I pulled for playoff tracks, but that included the first race of the year and then the second. when you actually dissect what these teams have done from 2018 to, well, there's no races this year, so just from 2018 to really 2020, Harvick, of course, is right there, but he's only 0.2 points above the second place guy, and that is the defending champion, Chase Elliott. That was a little surprising to see him that high up there. I know he was strong last year in the playoffs, but the fact over 30 races that he's been in the playoffs, maybe wasn't always eligible, of course, but no matter what, he's the second best driver above guys like Logano, Truex, Kyle Busch. Just kind of wanted to point that out. I mean, Larson's getting all the attention right now, and rightfully so, but the guy that's been right there with him, second place, beat him at Coda, is Chase Elliott, and he is the second best driver according to driver rating at those in playoff races.
And he has the most wins out of anybody in that stretch too, with 5. So
good point.
Very, very strong when it matters, and he's a driver that should be on the radar as we get closer to this. We'll see if he can dial it in and be as fast as his teammate, but man, there's still a lot of racing left to get this stuff dialed in, and that team seems to typically get it dialed in when it matters.
Yeah, Alan Gustafson, he's rock solid crew chief, so I would imagine they'll be strong again. But I just thought that was something worth mentioning. Was there any other drivers before we maybe shift gears that you've had circled or that you wanted to potentially make note about?
I think we really covered a lot of them. We didn't talk about some like Ryan Blaney that much, but he's one of those guys I'm really interested to see the next few races, how he kind of comes out of the All-Star break, and if he's going to catch fire or if he's going to fade. He's in this interesting spot. He has a win. He's going to be in the playoffs, but I just kind of want to see where they're at in the season and see if they progress. How about you? And is there anybody that sticks out that you're wanting to watch or kind of see how they adapt coming out of the playoffs, or the All-Star break?
I'm hoping to see Matty D and that team, that Wood Brothers team, take a little bit step forward and run well and be solid in the playoffs and at least make it past that first round. That may be a little difficult at this point, but I think that they're a strong enough team that they can do it. And I just want to see him run well, but that's more just from like a fan standpoint. I think we've covered all the big main players, and they all are in interesting positions at this point. If some of these drivers can follow their historic trends like Harvick, he's a guy that's going to be it could be a big threat in the playoffs that we haven't seen so far. But again, we haven't seen that so far this year. So Hamlin, again, you look at some of these upcoming races, it could go either way with the team. So and there's no one really else. But you brought up Blaney, and the first thing I thought of was at the All-Star race, if you're playing any lineups, he's probably the best play on the slate. Let's shift gears a little bit. Let's talk a little bit about the All-Star race. We've already mentioned, we're not planning on going too heavy. I'm actually going to the All-Star race. I didn't really expect it to happen, but hey, it kind of fell in my lap, so of course I'm going to go. I'm looking forward to it. This will be my first All-Star race. It'll be kind of crazy to see NASCAR roll around again in such a short amount of time, but I'm looking forward to it. One of the main reasons that we kind of talked about not necessarily wanting to provide too much, to not go our normal content route, is we don't even know who the full players are yet.
Field.
There's four teams that are going to make it into the All-Star race, and we don't know which 4 of those are.
And we won't be doing our race day rundown because there's so much information that is yet to be completed, because they have the open race and things that have to unfold before we even understand who the full field will be. But we'll be active on Twitter, trying to give you some information. If you do have questions, tweet at us, the DK Garage. The link's down below. Go follow us there, and we'll do our best to help. But looking at information available to us now, Brian Blaney, as we talked about, is in a great position. He's starting last. until the next couple drivers are able to race their way in. And then we have the fan vote. So there will be could be up to 4 drivers that.
Well, there will be 4 drivers.
There are 4 drivers that make the race, but based on everything, the random draw, Blaney's in last.
So just keep in mind as you watch the Open, the driver who wins the first stage will start 18th. The driver who wins the second stage will start 19th. If you win the Open race, you start 20th, and then the fan vote starts last at 21st. So that will help because I don't know if DraftKings is going to be able to update that in time if you're building lineups. So just keep that in mind as you watch the All-Star race. That's how the remaining schedule or the starting order will be set. But you're right. Blaney is essentially starting last. There's not very many dominator points up for grabs. So we're not looking for that domination to really pay off. So we really have to look at PD, the best PD on the slate. And, I didn't know if we were going to really talk about this, so I don't have all the Texas stats, but I know just from watching that race, Ryan Blaney is really strong at Texas, and starting 17th, if you're going to be playing any lineups, you're going to want to have, I would imagine, quite a bit of exposure to Blaney, especially in cash.
Yeah, and these kind of races, these wild card races where nobody really knows what's going on, and it's going to be chaotic. You'll see people not be able to get their lineups submitted on time. It's just kind of a weird weekend, and that's why we don't feel 100% confident putting out our race guide and all that stuff, because we don't want to provide you information that's just irrelevant. So that is something to consider, and it's an opportunity also if you're able to find the right strategy, find the right drivers where you can be able to take home solid winnings. I've done it in a previous All-Star event.
We both did it last year.
We did it strongly last year. So
it was funny because, you were definitely into playing that week, and I was actually going to be like, nah, it's not there. And, of course, as the race got closer, there was still contest open. I'm like, I'll throw a little bit in there. And I think I ended up having almost what I would normally play, and it paid out. It paid out nice for me. It paid out even better for you. So there are opportunities here, but it's a different format than last year. It's just a different venue. But I think that's really the two strategies: play light to play fun. Obviously, those light lineups can still win you big money. It's not like you have to have a bunch of lineups. But the other thing is to get a little diversified, get a little bit more exposure to some of these other drivers, because you'll probably end up tying with a lot of people. It's very unlikely that there will be an outright winner in the big contest or any of these multi-entry
field.
But hey, who cares? If you profit, you profit. It's fun. So that's kind of, in my opinion, the two ways to look at this slate and playing it this week. So it kind of comes down to personal preference.
Yeah, and place differential is going to be one of the main things, like we talked about. Not really a dominator situation, especially with the inverts happening at the end of the stages, multiple stages, quite a few stages. I'm not 100% sure how many there are in total, but
there's like 6 stages or something like that. It's kind of ridiculous. Again, it's going to be fun and entertaining to watch because that's what the All-Star race is. It's not supposed to be a regular race. This is where they do a lot of experimenting to potentially try new things in the future. But I mean, you look at, and then the other thing briefly is, with the less horsepower, a lot of drivers are expecting this to be more like a super speedway. So even if we see a driver like Larson lead that whole first stage or race or whatever it is, he might have the most laps led, but the fastest laps could be sprinkled throughout because that's what happens at super speedways. And then if there's random draws and inverts, so if he ends up going to the back, he might have a hard time getting his way back up to the front. So he may not lead the laps that you're expecting him to lead. If it's a more normal Texas race, you probably lock Larson in. But now with that price tag starting first, it can work, but it seems kind of risky,
It definitely does, and with NASCAR toning down the horsepower to 510, it really is going to create more of a pack racing. The draft matters. You will get fastest laps sprinkled throughout the field more often because of that style of racing, and it becomes even more so of a wild card, because Texas I've always kind of considered a wild card, but with this setup that they're coming in with, even more so. So guys like Austin Dillon can be in the conversation. If Bubba Wallace makes it on the fan boat, he could be in the conversation.
He could race his
and
way in.
He can race his way in too. Yeah, absolutely. So that's
McDowell won't be racing in the Open, so he didn't have to worry about getting dumped by McDowell. That's what happened last year.
So it's gonna there's a lot of things left to unfold that we don't know yet that will make this very interesting, and something that if you do have questions, like I said, make sure you're following on Twitter. Reach out. We'll be there making these decisions based on what we're seeing as well. So reach out. I think that's about all I've got to add on this race. Do you have anything else that you want to mention before we go on that?
No, I think this was it was a good overall episode. I think it'll be kind of fun to look back once we get into the playoffs, kind of see where some of our opinions were this race. But the All-Star is just a fun event. I'll be posting some stuff on some of our socials from the track. That'll be fun. Like I said, I've never been to the All-Star race or any, so it'll be interesting to see the different, just the way this show is, because it's not a normal race. I've been to a Texas race, a few of them, so I kind of know the kind of generally how they feel. So it'll be interesting to see if there's anything different about it. With more stuff opening up, especially being open here in Texas, I would expect there to be a little bit more interactions kind of with the teams and fans. I don't know if we'll experience much of it on Sunday, but I know they've had more like kind of meet and greet so far at the track this year, or this weekend. So I think just overall it's just going to be kind of fun. But this NASCAR kind of hit it. They hit it right. It has been, I think, a great season so far, and the timing of this All-Star break, the races we have, the secondary break because of the Olympics, that time off, is going to be really fun to see how these last 10 races go and set the stage for the playoffs. It's still possible, we have different, all the wins get taken by 17 different drivers. I mean, who knows what's going to happen? I don't expect that to happen. I think there will be a few guys getting in on points, but it may be a lot less than what we're used to.
Well, we've got a lot to find out how it plays out. We've got some time left. I'm excited to see your viewpoint from the All-Star race. So you'll have to tweet out, take over the Twitter. But everybody else out there, if you watch, we really appreciate it. We definitely would appreciate it if you subscribe. If you've been watching for a few weeks, we've been getting some feedback that you've enjoyed the content. We've been seeing some winnings, and it's awesome to see that. So if you are able to win, we'd like to see the shares on Twitter, just being able to say, hey, this is relative content. If you're not seeing something you want, let us know. We're here to try to help you win. We've had fun doing this for the season so far. Again, the subscription, or when you subscribe, it helps us, and it helps us understand we're putting out relative content. Thanks for watching. We want to continue to engage. I'm Joe, that's Jeremy, and we'll see you next time.